Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the International Association for Impact Assessment's virtual forum series, Think Big, 2050 City Megagrowth, Assessing and Addressing the Impacts. I'm Heather Goldstone, Chief Communications Officer at Woodwell Climate Research Center, and your moderator for this session. In our previous session, our presenters challenged us to think differently and creatively about the role of impact assessment in climate-resilient city growth. Today, we'll get down to the nuts and bolts with practical strategies, tools, and examples. Our first speaker today is Philippa Burmeister. Philippa has been involved in integrated environmental management for the past 20 years. Her career started in planning, which, with her environmental qualifications, resulted in a focus on identification of environmental opportunities and constraints to ensure sustainable use of natural resources to efficiently meet socioeconomic needs. More recently, she has specialized in air quality and climate change. Today, she'll walk us through an overview of the tools available in planning and environmental management and how to mainstream climate change in the various tools to build greater resilience in urban planning and achieve successful climate change adaptation.
Hello, I'm Philippa Burmeister, an associate partner with SRK Consulting. I started my career in the planning field, so while I was always an environmental scientist, my first position was with a planning company where I gained experience in the planning tools available, particularly in South Africa. From there, I have focused on your typical environmental tools like environmental impact assessment, but also more strategic tools like environmental management frameworks and strategic environmental assessments. More recently in my career, I've begun focusing on air quality and climate change. So as a quick overview, in today's discussion, I will cover the tools that are available from a climate change perspective to inform environmental and planning tools, which then work in unison in achieving objectives. So you'll see on the slide, environmental tools such as environmental management frameworks, they feed into spatial development frameworks that then inform planning. Similarly, SEAs will inform IDPs, municipal open space systems and EIAs will inform the town planning scheme and the LUMs. And then we'll go all the way through to more the project-specific tools, such as environmental auditing and sustainability certification that would inform planning at a more project-specific level, like where you have your building plans passed. So I'll now take you through some of the values and limitations of the various tools, commencing with the climate change tools. The sixth assessment report, or what's referred to as AR6, is a great synthesis of information, particularly for national level policymakers. However, it doesn't provide very detailed site-specific information. The World Bank Climate Change Knowledge Portal, on the other hand, also provides a great synthesis and particularly graphical representation of both historical climate data and predicted futures. It takes it down to a country and provincial levels, which is very helpful. However, it only goes to those levels. It sums the data, so it can't do site-specific predictions. It does, however, have a function to view watersheds, which also can help in understanding the implications, particularly for rainfall, where rain falling in one area may affect a different site. And finally, you've got the finest scale data, that is the CIMP6. It integrates 32 global circulation models, but in order to access the site-specific data, you do require programming and the downscaling of the various models. There's also an aspect of needing to understand and interpret the 32 models, and in some cases select the models that are most appropriate for your region based on monitored data that may be available. So now that we have an understanding of the climate change tools available to inform the other aspects of urban planning, I'll take you through some of the environmental management tools available. The environmental management framework happens to be one of my favorites. It is very focused on spatial data, linking these spatial opportunities and constraints to legal requirements for environmental impact assessment, and links this to environmental requirements at a legal level as well as a planning level. The limitation is that this is a South African tool, so not applicable to the rest of the world. It is also only as good as its implementation, and so unless it is used all the time to inform environmental impact assessment and spatial planning, it isn't very useful. The strategic environmental assessment is, however, very much a global tool and largely informed the development of the EMF. The advantage of an SEA is that it can be designed specifically to address the needs of the assessment. It can inform the selection of alternatives, and it's great for assessing cumulative impact, and so perfect for urban planning. However, it has limited legal standing. Municipal open space has all the same values as the environmental management framework, but it only focuses on open space areas and not specific uses. Environmental impact assessments are highly detailed and have an extensive legal backing, but it is difficult in an EIA to assess alternatives effectively and cumulative impacts. For instance, you can't truly, in an EIA, consider a completely different land use because you don't have a developer driving that land use. Then we come down to the very specific ones. This is where the magic happens. Environmental auditing and environmental conservation officer activities. This gives you a fantastic opportunity to work closely with the developer and the client in ensuring that the environmental management activities required are assessed and addressed. However, it is highly site-specific and it doesn't consider cumulative impacts. Similarly, with sustainability certification, because it's voluntary, it's often well adopted by the client or the proponent, but it is often used to drive marketing and reputation, but again, doesn't truly consider cumulative impacts. So now that we have covered the environmental management tools, we'll cover a little bit about the planning tools available in urban planning. First of all, the spatial development frameworks. This is a spatial representation of a municipality. It focuses on identification of opportunities and constraints, and if used correctly, will inform the land use management systems of a municipality and ensure that appropriate land uses are identified and implemented. But these are very strategic and policy-based documents. The integrated development plan would support the spatial development framework, but doesn't have a spatial aspect. And then we have town planning schemes. These most people will know about. They are widely adopted. They are very closely linked to building plan approval, and they can consider cumulative impact, although they don't always do this. And in terms of limitations, we do sometimes find that town planning schemes don't always consider environmental constraints sufficiently, resulting occasionally in issues around development rights being contravened by the need to protect environmental resources. Then we have building plan approval. These are done at a very high level of detail. Again, they are only as good as the implementing authority, but they are highly specific. They don't consider cumulative, and they can be a little bit limiting if this is the only tool you're using. And then finally, the building inspectorate, again, where the magic is happening, because this is where individuals visit the building site and are able to ensure that the environmental issues are being addressed. So by way of summary, no one tool is perfect, and it's critically important that we select the tool based on what we're trying to achieve. What is important is that we use the climate change tools available to mainstream climate change thinking into all the tools at the different levels of detail. Like a good contractor, you need a very big bag of tools, and you need to pick your tool for the job and be able to use them interchangeably to achieve the objective. Importantly, each tool is only as good as its implementation. And so having a suite of tools in place is not enough. It is important to, on an ongoing basis, update the tools and ensure that they are implemented. Thank you for joining me, and please reach out should you have any further questions or would like to just discuss the opportunities of the various tools I've highlighted. Thank you.
Thank you, Philippa. Next, we turn to Willemien Van Niekerk. She's a principal researcher at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research in South Africa. A professional urban planner, Willemien has over 25 years experience as a consultant, lecturer, and researcher working in multi and interdisciplinary environments. She is an innovator, a developer, and manager of the Green Book project. Green Book is an online planning support system that provides quantitative, multidisciplinary evidence of climate risks at local municipal level in support of South Africa's pursuit in the planning and design of climate resilient, hazard-resistant settlements. And she's going to introduce us to this important tool now.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Willemien Van Niekerk. I'm from Smart Places at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. And today I'm presenting on the Green Book, which is a planning support tool for local municipalities in South Africa to adapt settlements to the impacts of climate change. This is the landing page of the Green Book. So you can go to greenbook.co.za and you will get to this landing page where you can scroll to various tools and other information that is available on adapting settlements to the impacts of climate change. The Green Book is not a book. It is all of the information is available in this online planning support tool. And just to provide you with a little bit of background, the Green Book is a multidisciplinary open access tool, so it's freely available to anybody to access and supports local South African municipalities with adapting to current as well as future climate change impacts based on risk assessments. And this risk and vulnerability assessment is provided within the Green Book. The Green Book was initially co-funded by the Canadian International Development Research Centre, as well as ourselves, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, and was developed between 2016 and 2019, also in partnership with the South African National Disaster Management Centre. The Green Book provides an in-depth current and future 2050 climate risk and vulnerability profile for every municipality in South Africa. So that is 213 profiles, as well as the settlements within those municipalities. There's over 1,600 settlement profiles. And we also provide 81 planning-related adaptation actions and contextualize the national climate change impacts in 11 narrated story maps. Many partners came on board after the launch of the Green Book in 2019. You see their logos on the screen below. So those are various South African as well as international grant agencies. And we are now in the second phase of the Green Book, where we focus on developing enduring municipal capacity to address climate risk through training and support that we offer, by developing new tools with downscaled metropolitan-specific profiles that indicate climate risks, and these we call the Metro View. And we also identify knowledge gaps in our understanding of climate risks in South Africa. And we keep on growing the number of partners and collaborators involved in the Green Book. What has been the impact so far? So the Green Book is an internationally recognized online platform. Since its launch in 2019, the website has received more than 18,000 views It is cited in multiple journal articles, research reports, dissertations, local, provincial, and national government strategies and plans. We've been interviewed on national TV and for various news articles, and our data are used by hundreds of consultants, researchers, and students in a variety of projects, also because it is freely available to be downloaded from the Green Book itself. It is recognized as a reference tool by various state departments in South Africa. So the Green Book is making impact because it supplies critical evidence of all municipalities in the country at an unprecedented depth and scale, and because it is freely available. The climate risk and vulnerability profiles reduce the need to commission time and resource-intensive risk assessments, and the adaptation tool provides actionable solutions that can be accessed instantaneously and can be integrated and mainstreamed into local municipal plans and policies. The Green Book thus capacitates municipalities and many others who use it with evidence and solutions that best serve those most vulnerable to climate change. I'm going to show you what the Green Book itself looks like. So if we just go to the Green Book, to the online planning support tool, if you go to greenbook.co.za, it takes you to this landing page. And on the landing page, you find your guide to the Green Book, which is a short 10-minute video that takes you through all the components of the Green Book and shows you where to find various information, what the tools consist of, and so forth. There is a call to action by our partners calling up municipalities to take action now to reduce disaster losses in the future. The first tool that we provide are story maps. So if I just take you to the story map section, if you click on the button, you get to these 11 story maps. And these are narrated stories. So if you scroll down, if you click on any one of them, let's, for example, take the story of urban growth in South Africa. It opens up a story map with various graphics and maps. And as you scroll down, it really tells the story of the urbanization in South Africa, the implications, what it means for the various provinces, how much we project that the South African population will grow to 2050, and so forth. It also tells a little bit the story of socioeconomic vulnerability. And so these are the 11 story maps. And as you can see, you can scroll down and have a look at the story for coastal flooding in South Africa, floods, wildfires, drought, climate change, the impact of climate change on groundwater, surface water, agriculture, forestry, and fisheries, as well as the macroeconomy. So that just tells the national and provincial story of the impact of climate change on South Africa and its settlements. If you go back to the landing page and you go to the next tool, it provides you with a tool that's called the Municipal Risk Profile Tool. And if you click on Go to Tool, it takes you to a next tool, and in here you can type in the province, any one of the 9 provinces, and any one of the municipalities. So for this presentation, I've selected to go to the Limpopo province, to the capital city, which is Polokwane. You can download a template here that provides you with a template of the information contained on this tool, but you still have to copy and paste the information in there because it is called up directly from the service. So as you scroll down, you get to a slide which is the vulnerability, and here you can see the socioeconomic vulnerability. You can click on the economic, the physical, and the environmental vulnerability of this specific local municipality in South Africa. We rank the vulnerability, so we can see that Polokwane is 53rd out of 213 municipalities in the country, and the vulnerability, the socioeconomic vulnerability, is improving over time, so between the various census periods. We can see this is where it fits in the country, but one can also have a look at the province, and here we can see that it is the 4th local municipality out of 22 in the province. One can also, if you hover over the economic vulnerability, you can see what it consists of. And if you click on it, you can see the economic vulnerability indicator for Polokwane, and we can see that it is worsening over time. You can also toggle between the current picture, and then you can go to a future picture. So if you toggle to the future, here we provide you with population growth projections. So this is for the medium growth scenario, from 2010 right up to 2050, one can see how the population is projected to grow. So by 2050, Polokwane is projected to be over 1 million people. If we then scroll down, just staying in the 2050 view, we see the population growth pressure. So here you see a map of Polokwane and its settlements. So these are various settlements within Polokwane, a local municipality. And then you see the population pressure. So you see it's a medium pressure, a high pressure, and medium pressure. That just means that given the base that it's working from, that the population will increase either medium or high, and that would put pressure on the local municipality to provide services and housing and also jobs and so forth. On this button, one can download all of these spreadsheets with information on the population and population growth pressure. If one has a look at the current picture and the settlement vulnerability, one can click on any one of these. So if I, for example, click only on Polokwane, one can see what that growth pressure is really what makes Polokwane vulnerable currently. One can also see for all of the other settlements what makes them vulnerable by just clicking on that settlement itself to show what makes it vulnerable socioeconomically. If one scrolls down, one gets to the climate projections. And in the Green Book, we've downscaled climate projections to an 8 by 8 square kilometer grid for the whole of South Africa, which is the highest resolution of climate projections available for the whole country. Some metropolitan cities have downscaled it to even a higher resolution, but for the whole country, this is the highest resolution of information that's available. Again, one can download the information, and if one uses this cross and you click on it, you find the minimum and the average and the maximum temperatures, the current temperatures for Polokwane city. There you can see what they are currently. And again, the same for average rainfall. If I click anywhere on the map with my cross, then it gives me the average rainfall per annum for that local municipality. However, if I toggle to the future, it gives me 4 variables. So average temperature, average rainfall, extreme rainfall days, and very hot days. It provides you with the uncertainty for an RCP scenario of 4.5 as well as 8.5. So in the Green Book, we use the RCP 8.5, which is a low mitigation scenario. And that is really the pathway that the world is on at the moment. And we also see that in South Africa, that average temperatures increase more than the averages worldwide. So again, I can use my cross anywhere on the map to see what it is for that specific place. So you will see that the average increase in temperature is projected to be more than, is about 2.6 degrees Celsius by 2050 for Polokwane. We can also have a look at the extreme rainfall days to get an idea of settlement flooding. And here again, it provides us with an indication of the uncertainty and as well as an average for that specific place, which it looks like it's not really increasing over time. But then if we look at the number of very hot days, this province is really projected to become hotter and drier in future. And here we see that Polokwane, for example, is projected to experience under an RCP 4.5 scenario about 17.6 more very hot days by 2050. If we toggle back to the current view and we scroll down, we also get, we've modeled the impact of hazards on settlements. So for example, if we look at fire, this provides us with the fire likelihood. Again, one can download the maps and the data, and we see that the likelihood, the current likelihood for fires to occur around settlements on the urban periphery of settlements in Polokwane is likely. Now, if we go to, let's take fire again, and if we go to the future, if we toggle to a future view, we see that the number of fire danger days is really set to increase in the future by 39 more fire danger days in 2050. And if we look at the risk of an increase in wildfires on the urban periphery of these settlements, we see that there is an extreme risk, a risk of increase in wildfires by 2050. And that really makes sense, given that this part of our country is projected to become hotter and drier. If we look at flooding, so this is urban flooding, we see at the current view that it is really quite likely that this city will experience urban flooding. If we look, for example, at droughts, again at the current view, we see that it is really drought is projected to increase over time, as you see these dark red colors. If we look towards 2050, we look at the SPI index, and this provides us with an idea of whether or not drought is likely to increase over time. The risk of increase in drought tendencies for this specific municipality is also very high, and that is in line with the projections for this part of the world. If we just toggle back to the current view and we look at the number of very hot days, we see that for Polokwane, it is about 5.3, it's about 20.6 very hot days for Polokwane currently. And if we look at the number of very hot days at heatwave days, it is about 1.9 currently. But then if we toggle to the future, we also see that there is a risk of increase in heat extremes within Polokwane. So there we see it is a medium risk for heat extremes in the future. And then if we scroll down to the impact of climate change on certain key resources in the future, well, currently, and if we look at, for example, something like water supply, we see that currently the water supply is more than the demand. So it's at 0.8. Once it reaches 1, it means that the demand for water will be more than the supply. And we also see that this municipality is about 30%, almost 30% reliant on surface water, but mostly on groundwater. So if the water supply is threatened in the future, it also means that this municipality's water supply will be threatened. And then one can also have a look at the 2050 view, and this is where we take the population growth projections into account and various variables that we look at, the annual precipitation, whether or not it's going up or down, the evaporation is going up, so it means specific places becoming drier in future. The runoff will increase due to certain extreme rainfall events, but the regional water supply will also go up. And so this is really the risk profile tool for municipalities in South Africa. And then if you scroll down, it takes you to the adaptation actions tool. So if we just open up the adaptation actions tool, it provides you with 81 adaptation actions. So if one selects, if one filters, for example, for heat stress and wildfire, which are two of the threats in terms of climate change for this local municipality, and then one can select from a number of urban functions, for example, spatial planning and let's say environmental planning, and then it provides you with 19 adaptation actions that one can select from and integrate and mainstream within local plans and policies. So one adaptation action, for example, is to identify vulnerable infrastructure. So if one opens up this adaptation action, it provides you with a description, with goals, with benefits, with qualitative costs, examples, if we have any, and then also just the citations of where we got this information from. And it also provides you with an idea of what this adaptation action is classified as. So this one categorized is a spatial planning action. It is a win-win action. In other words, it doesn't cost the municipality any high cost like critical infrastructure, hard infrastructure, and it also addresses all of these impacts of climate change. And then there are a number of supporting actions that can be taken and that needs to be integrated all together into various plans and policies so as to address the impacts of climate change. So for example, protecting critical infrastructure, then it opens up another screen with this adaptation action that again shows what the action is all about, a description of what it is the goals that one would like to achieve, what are the benefits, and so forth. And again, just indicating the typology of this specific action. So if I just go back to the landing page of the Green Book, so this is the municipal risk profiles. We've briefly looked at the adaptation actions, and this is the Metro view. So the Metro view is really downscaled risk and vulnerability tools that goes down to a ward level for certain local metropolitan municipalities. So at the moment, only the city of Tshwane is featured here. Very soon, we will also have the city of eThekwini as well as Buffalo City, and it provides a risk and vulnerability profile as well as a adaptation actions tool. So here you will find various actions, for example, green buildings, ecological infrastructure, water, energy, waste, infrastructure, and so forth. And this is city specific. So it doesn't speak in general as to the adaptation actions tool on the Green Book, but really speaks to a very specific city, and it was also developed specifically for that city. So I would encourage you to go and explore the Green Book. There's really a depth of information that is not available anywhere else. This information was specifically developed to support and capacitate municipalities in South Africa to be able to address the impacts of climate change and the impact of these settlements, of these impacts on South African settlements. So please do go and explore the Green Book in detail. And you are welcome to contact us if you have any information. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Willemien. Next up is Jeremy Gorelick. Jeremy is a development finance practitioner with over 20 years of experience in capital for climate-smart urban infrastructure. He's advised bilateral and multilateral aid agencies and development finance institutions on the most effective programming for their contributions towards a more sustainable planet, resulting in over $4 billion in flows and transactions closed. In this presentation, he will share his views on the most significant obstacles for cities in achieving their long-term development goals, and also offer promising information for cities, particularly around the prospect of technical assistance from key development partners.
Hello, my name is Jeremy Gorelick, and I have dedicated my career to working with cities in developing countries, helping them to design and fund critical infrastructure that is also climate smart. Over the past 20 years, I have led efforts that have resulted in the raising of over $3.5 billion from a wide variety of donors and financial institutions. However, the need is several orders of magnitude greater, and there is inconsistency on the best ways to ensure that projects are designed to meet sustainable goals in every sense of the word: socioeconomic, financial, operational, and environmental. So why this talk on cities and climate change? Climate change is a global phenomenon that largely impacts urban life. Rising global temperatures cause sea levels to rise, increase the number of extreme weather events such as floods, droughts, and storms, and increase the spread of tropical disease. All of these have costly impacts on cities' basic services, infrastructure, housing, human livelihoods, and health. At the same time, cities are also a key contributor to climate change, as urban activities are major sources of greenhouse gas emissions. According to the UN's Environment Program, estimates suggest that cities are responsible for 75% of global carbon dioxide emissions, with transport and buildings being amongst the largest contributors. Studies released by the World Bank have revealed a glaring challenge. While the total value of funds for debt, one of the largest forms of finance for urban infrastructure in developed markets, is $103 trillion, it's far smaller in emerging markets, recently calculated at just under $1.8 trillion. The same studies have shown, however, that the total climate finance required by developing countries is nearly $6 trillion, or 3 times the actual supply of funds. Developing countries need to either find new ways to source additional funds from their regular sources of capital, or alternatively, make their projects more attractive to capital from developed countries. Research from the Climate Policy Initiative shows that currently, approximately half of the funds for project development in emerging markets is through grants or non-repayable finance, with debt in the form of loans and bonds accounting for an additional 40%. For cities with low creditworthiness, which is unfortunately a significant number of those in emerging markets, the prospect of borrowing is difficult, given the perception by lenders on the likelihood of being repaid, often phrased by credit ratings agencies as the willingness and ability of cities to honor their debts. As you can see on the right side of the screen, the sources of finance are broken down into 6 main categories. The lion's share of funds for urban infrastructure projects originate in the form of transfers from national government. Unfortunately, given competing priorities and general budget constraints, national governments are unable to provide the required funding to ensure project execution. Accordingly, cities look to a mix of sources: money from donors, typically philanthropic foundations and foreign governments, and money from lenders, which can include development finance institutions and banks. Development finance institutions, or DFIs, are often viewed as being ideal sources as they lend at concessionary rates, which means that they are providing funds at lower interest rates and can lend for longer periods of time than commercial banks, a phenomenon driven by the fact that the money that DFIs lend is typically public capital, where profitability and financial returns are not as essential as for private lenders. Nonetheless, regardless of the terms and conditions for lending, cities are obligated to repay funds borrowed and, in the case of a default on repayment, may ultimately need to look to their respective national governments for support. However, it is only with a diversification of funding that cities will be able to source sufficient money to deliver their projects. DFIs around the world have made commitments and developed methodologies to ensure that what they invest in has a positive climate impact. Therefore, DFIs are eager to invest in developing countries' climate projects, but there is a lack of knowledge of how to present projects, and project sponsors often have a limited capacity to comply with DFI's investment policies. Yet, the challenge for many cities in developing countries is far more profound than simply deciding where to source the money, whether from a DFI or otherwise. Instead, for the majority of cities, it is a better understanding on how to progress through the project development cycle that often hampers them. Cities need to consider each of these 6 attributes: project rationale, options appraisal, commercial viability, affordability, deliverability, and alignment with climate goals. Through following a rigorous approach in answering these fundamental questions, cities are often able to attract support from development partners. Questions that are typically considered include those on screen. Why is your project needed? Or what's the problem that we're trying to solve? What difference will the project make? How does the project fit into a broader set of climate concerns? Who will benefit? When and where will your project happen? How are you going to carry out your project? And what do you need to do in order to deliver it? More equipment, the premises, the staff, the general preparation. How will you measure success? And how much money will your overall project need? So in order to consider this, there are a number of different ways that cities have considered and developed pipelines and also developed international or at least regional good and best practices. Cities will typically follow a pathway considering 7 steps in the phasing and delivery of a project, as you can see on screen, from identification of the project all the way through evaluation. Each step is critical, and appropriate planning and development and project preparation is often the hallmark of a successful program. So starting from here, we can see identification is critical, identifying the need, the stakeholders, and searching for suitable projects. Once that's done, we can move on to preparation, which is the core, at least for me, of making sure that projects are done correctly. In this phase or step of the project development cycle, we'll look at how do we test the viability and sustainability of a project? How do we make sure that from a technical and a financial point of view, that the project will actually be able to meet all of the expectations, particularly the sustainability ones that I mentioned at the beginning of this talk. This is often referred to as the feasibility study phase as well. After the feasibility study is complete, we move on to project appraisal, where there's a comprehensive internal review by a city, particularly from the financial department, as well as from the politicians and those elected officials who are particularly concerned about the way that a project might fit into their overall political goals, but also the needs and where the constituent expectations are. And that feeds into the general public review. We often see that there is a desire and a decision made by a city where the city has failed to properly engage with the constituents across that city. And so that general public review ends up being critically important. Following that, we start looking at the financial procurement. So how do we actually bring in the money? Who are the best providers of that capital or funding that's required? And how do we make sure that when we compare against different options, we are in fact selecting the best instrument that meets the best part of the city's needs? When that decision has been made and when all of this has been completed, then we start the actual project implementation, where we look at how do we set up and deliver the project? How do we make sure from a project management perspective, everything is being done effectively and correctly? And how do we overall ensure that cities and their constituents get the needs out of the project met as much as possible? Following that, we start looking at operations. And so operations often is one of the parts that people forget to plan for, forget to include both an operational and a maintenance plan, the type of thing that's required to ensure that the new infrastructure is well maintained and properly integrated and well used. Finally, after going through that entire process, we need to make sure that we look back and evaluate to really be confident that the project has delivered against the best interests of the city, best interests of its constituents, and for the purposes of our talk, best interests of the environment as well. And so we do an evaluation of the delivery of the project, of the ongoing maintenance of the project, and really at heart, the entire success of the project. As I said, though, many cities lack the bandwidth and resources to undertake this process. And this slide on screen now indicates only a snapshot of the dozens of organizations that are prepared to provide support to cities for their climate project needs. In summary, and again, based on my decades of work in this area, I would like to leave you with 3 points for consideration. The first, cities have a significant role to play in the battle against climate change, and particularly those cities in emerging markets. Yet, and as I've shown, cities in emerging markets struggle to access the finance required to deliver their climate smart infrastructure projects. However, they need to diversify if they want to deliver their ambitions at pace and at scale. Finally, the international community, particularly development partners, have adopted a fairly universal approach to project development and are prepared to provide support. It is my sincere hope that in the years to come, we will see increasing amounts of money flowing to urban infrastructure projects in developing countries, and your attention to this issue will only help to heighten both the need, but the understanding of how we meet that need. In closing, thank you again for listening. I hope that this was an inspirational talk for you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Last but not least, our final presenter today is Susanne Fischer. Susanne is an urban and environmental planner specializing in transborder planning and sustainability. She holds a postgraduate degree in national, regional, and local planning from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. She is deputy head of the regional planning section at the Department of Public Works and Transport of the Canton Basel-Stadt. Basel's city parliament declared a climate emergency in 2019 and demanded climate smart policy in all areas of the administration. As a result, climate change became one of the top 3 priorities of the Basel legislation. Susanne will share subsequent actions that have shaped urban planning in Basel, as well as the work that remains to be done and the pressing need for information sharing between cities.
Hello, everybody from IAIA. My name is Susanne Fischer. I'm an urban planner. I'm a practitioner for over 25 years. I work for the Basel authorities in Switzerland, and I'm also a member of ISOCARP, which is a global organization of urban planners, very similar to IAIA. And these 2 organizations are in collaboration. So that's why I'm invited to present now for the forum about climate adaptation and urban planning. I will present the case of Basel. Well, the urban climate adaptation concept I like to present, while it is no panacea, it's no one fits it all. It's one way to face the climate adaptation and to face the recent climate challenges in Basel. So it's one method, it's one instrument I like to present. For the site, while Basel is not a very big city, it's quite popular, it's well known, it's 200,000 inhabitants in Basel. We are very close to the borders of France and Germany. We are in a tri-national area. For the presentation, I will come back to my key findings. I have already presented here on the first slide. As you could read, my key findings are the strong political commitment is necessary for any changes now for the climate changes which are so urgent. Compulsory planning instruments for climate adaptation provide a guidance, like our urban climate adaptation concept. It's a compulsory planning instrument, and that's very important. Otherwise, we are not so soon in the implementation. And the highest priority needs to be given to cross-sectoral coordination. The starting point for climate mitigation and climate adaptation is the fact that Basel will be highly concerned by the future high temperatures of the city. As you could learn from this map here, you see that half of the city is covered by this dark red areas. These are the focus areas of Basel. We made a climate analysis, which is based on a simulation model. The data are a combination of meteorological data and data of the population. So this combination, on one hand, the future temperature for the year 2030, and on the other hand, the population, where's the highest density of buildings, where live particularly young people or elderly people, where are the hospitals. This combination gives you this overview in this map where we have these highly concerned focus areas. And we learn that 2030 is not that far anymore in terms of time, and Basel is very highly concerned by these heat islands. There is a big vulnerability by the Basel population. So my key finding is that climate has to be a very high priority, otherwise we won't tackle the changes. And in the recent 2 to 3 years, I experienced that the issue of climate has very fast raised in the priority list. It's now really on the top of our priorities, and I don't know, I wonder if you experience the same, but I hope so, that climate is now really on the top of the list. Well, we had a pandemic crisis that changed the public awareness as well as the policies of the societies as well. In Basel, the impetus for this policy change, it came from the parliament, but it came also from the public, so it was both. And in the authorities, we were some very committed project managers which tried for some years already to put the topic of climate on the agenda, and in a way it was a mixture of top-down meets bottom-up, but it helps that the time has changed anyway. And now we could say that that climate is very important in Basel. The city parliament passed the climate emergency resolution in 2090, as did many other cities as well. Since then, we have an expert climate commission of the city parliament, which is responsible particularly for these projects. And well, they're very active in political petitions as well. And now in the recent legislation plan, 1 out of 3 priorities is the climate. Since I will go more in details a bit later about climate adaptation, so here some words about climate mitigation. How is the situation in Basel? Climate mitigation is already a leading policy since decades. In order to reduce carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases in general, and the climate mitigation is for some decades already a very important policy. But climate mitigation is in general more important than climate adaptation. Climate adaptation is kind of addition to the most important mitigation. We can't solve the climate only with adaptation. We have to do most of our actions with climate mitigation. But the climate adaptation, it is new. It is new to our agendas, and so that's why we have to learn more about it, and we don't have all the proper methods for it. Well, the situation with climate mitigation is quite good in Basel, but it doesn't mean that we already reached the gains of net zero. We did not. We are a bit back, like many other cities and other countries are. But nevertheless, Basel has one of the most progressive energy laws in Switzerland. That means that we will phase out oil and gas heating in 2037. And this project has begun already. We will substitute the oil and gas heating by district heating. And other alternative heatings like wood heating and other materials. So Switzerland is luckily enough to have 90% of the energy supply by hydropower, because there are many hydropower stations in the Alpine mountains. So it gives in general another situation like in other countries. And the transportation planning is very important to the city as well. It relies very much on a strong public transport. The tickets are priced very reasonable, so everybody could afford this public transport. The system is also very much based on bike transportation and pedestrian as well, mainly downtown, because the city is not that much. In terms of a modal split, we have a very good modal split for bike transportation. That means 35% in the city center, but only in the city center. And well, Basel is a very small and compact city that make it very easy for the public transport. It makes it easy for the bike lanes and for the pedestrian as well. While we had the pandemic, you could learn from the slide. There was a break in the diagram. We are not already back to normal already, but very close to that. But what we learned already, the public transportation system in Basel is already that good that we have in a way reached the ceiling. We know that we can't make any progress with our transportation system without very, very strong incentives, with a very, very strong policy, with pricing incentives or amendments of the lines in a very substantial way. So coming to the key finding two, that compulsory instruments are necessary, like our urban climate adaptation concept is. Well, I mentioned already that climate adaptation is new. We had in Basel very hot and long summer periods in the last years, and we have already another kind of climate. So everybody noticed that, and it's very easy to notice that because there were many problems with droughts. This is the reasons why we have developed this climate adaptation concept. It's a mixture of a strategic plan and already an action plan. So it gives very precise assignments to the authorities, what will be the actions in the future years. It's a compulsory instrument. It was adopted last year by the City Council, and we work in these 9 action fields, as you could learn from the slide. So to give you some examples, it's about planting more trees, to create more greenery in general. It's about amendments on our legal regulations, where are any obstacles to better climate adaptation in our already existing regulations, or it's about incentives for private subsidies and incentives for private landowners, and also public relation and communication and participation as part of it. Yeah, it's an overall instrument, and as I said, it's very important that it is a compulsory instrument. It's very essential for us to implement the measures which are described in these 9 action fields, that we could implement it very soon. I will pick out now 3 action fields. Action field number 1, the immediate measures. They will be carried out in the next summer and the following summers. It is, while these immediate measures are mobile and temporary, water fountains, evaporators, water pools, tree pots, green pergolas, and umbrellas. That's also the idea to give the free entrance to pools and to the zoo on very hot days. And we will find the appropriate places to place all these water fountains and the greenery together with the neighborhood. So participation will be one part of these immediate measures. These immediate measures will not save the climate, that's for clear, but they're very important to protect the quality of life we have in Basel and to protect our inhabitants. So it gives immediate measures to the life qualities, but they will be not so crucial for the climate. It's more about the quality of the open space. Very important is also the high number of the regular roadworks. We have a high number every year of street works and squares which has to be redesigned. And in this regular work, it's very important to integrate climate adaptation as well, to integrate as much green spaces as possible. It's also important to maximize the number of the trees in the public space. That means also to avoid a high number of parking lots, or to instead to place better the high number of trees which are necessary. Another measure is that tramways are only be constructed on green lines. There will be also new species. We will change the types of trees which will be planted in the future years, because we will take more plants from the southern part of Switzerland, which is very close to the Mediterranean climate. So the local trees, they suffer really from these droughts in the summertime. And the priority will be taken on that focus areas, which I showed you before on the map with these dark red areas. These are the focus areas where it's necessary to implement the measures very soon. We carry out some experiments in the huge site development. The site developments are very important because it's an area where you could try some new measures and to do something else. And because this bigger site which is renovated anyway, it's easier to implement some of the sponge city instruments. For example, as you could see on this slide, that on one site development area in the whole neighborhood, the streets won't have any rainwater sewage anymore. We design the streets with these green lines on both sides of the street for the rainwater infiltration. The infiltrated water will flow to the planted areas very soon. So it's not necessary to have the water management in the street anymore. But these are only streets with a slow speed. That means 30 kilometers per hour. So there will be no risk for any accidents. Very important are facade greenings or roof greenings. The roof greenings are mandatory already in Basel, but it has a little bit redesigned for more intensive vegetation and water retention, and less to the extensive vegetation, which is important for the biodiversity in some areas, but not in general for the climate. We made already some experiments with facade greenings to make them mandatory on the huge site development. There is enough space to have huge walls all covered by facade greenings, and it was realized already, and we made quite good experiences with that. But for the time being, it is still open how to measure the success of these pilot projects in a standard way. We are missing a bit measures to make the projects comparable, to give them a standard, maybe an international standard. We will realize that pilot projects anywhere, but we are missing a bit the methods to measure the success. Well, finance is always very important for the realization of the project. So it is the same in Basel. Fortunately, we have a fund which is called Added Value Fund, and we are able to cover a lot of the resources which are necessary for the climate adaptation by this fund. Although this fund is very specific to Basel and to Switzerland, and I would like to mention it because a lot of very good projects and important and urgent projects, they fail due to a lack of funding. So it's everywhere the same. And this Added Value Fund gives us the possibility to realize some of these measures and these projects I mentioned already very, very quickly. Added value, this is the difference between the market value and the land value before the rezoning. If it comes to an added value by new zoning, 40% goes to this fund. So it's a kind of a tax. It's a high tax, everybody knows that in Basel, but so far we don't have any problems with the demand for buildings, so it's fine. And it's meant to be a compensation for densification, and it's meant to be a compensation for the climate change as well. Because with the densification, the cities become hotter and they become drier, and the possibilities for an alternative water management, it will be more complicated by the years. So it's a kind of tax for the compensation of this urban development. So the problems have become global, so did the solution. That's why my third key finding highlights the need for a cross-sectoral coordination, and not even in the administration, but also in science, in all organizations, in the society as well. I think that's became very important. The climate mitigation is more driven by a sectoral policy or by sectoral authorities and experts, but climate adaptation makes us a bit more complicated in the need to implement a lot of measures which are more soft measures, and they need the cooperation of the neighborhood and a very close open space. And we need the coordination with the transportation planning, landscape design, architecture, monument protection, and so on. We need a lot of accordance with many other disciplines and the inhabitants of the city as well. Because we are already on a very, very high level, and the public space is very rare. A lot of climate adaptation has to be realized in the public space to give it really an impetus, and but there is not much space left to do so. This is really the difficulty to be successful in that field. That's why we need a very strong interdisciplinary collaboration to improve our projects and to implement climate adaptation projects. So I come into the last slide and the questions which raised IAIA to your forum. So how can practitioners help urban and regional planners more effectively address long-term cumulative climate and global impacts to their development strategies? And as an urban planner, I find that question very important, and I see really a lack in some methods. First of all, I'm missing a strategic assessment of plans and programs in Switzerland. There are some models in the European Union where it is done so, but master plans are not evaluated on their climate impacts in Switzerland. And I think this is very important to tackle very early the climate challenges very early, because while we have to go strict by our master plans on a cantonal level and on a regional level, so these are very important instruments, and they are missing these kind of assessment. Second, the work is done by projects, but there's a lack in the method to evaluate the project as a standard. Maybe the cumulative impact assessment could do so and help with the method of assessment. While we are doing our project, it's very hard to give them any marks or any notes to see by which indicators one project is better than the other. It's really hard to find a standard. Third, there is already the idea to evaluate the financial decisions by a climate assessment. So we have that idea already, but it's not realized so far. But here is the same. We have the lack of a suitable method, and we can't find proper procedures which could be worthwhile to assess the results and to display the results in a very transparent way. So we will see. It will be a political decision in Basel if all financial decisions of the city council should be assessed on their impact on the climate. And I think it's necessary not to do it only by quality, but also by quantity, to give it really a transparent standard. And fourth, the same has to be applied to all projects and procedures which will be implemented in the field of urban planning. It has to be described, well, the impact to the climate has to be described in all projects and procedures. Otherwise, we can't optimize the project, and otherwise, we can't really contribute to net zero, and we don't know where to contribute properly and where to contribute first. So our goal is to reach net zero in the year 37 or at least 40, but it's really hard to tackle it. And well, I think there's a necessity of better methods and instruments, and I hope that you from IAIA could hope with a collaboration. I'm convinced that collaboration could help with a planning organization like ISOCARP, where I'm a member, and it could be very successful to improve our field of urban planning and better to assess all the impacts on the climate. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope you could have a very fruitful discussion in your forum, and I hope I could learn from your discussions later on. And I'm looking forward to a close collaboration between IAIA and urban planning organizations. So with my best regards from Basel, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Susanne, as well as Jeremy, Willemien, and Philippa for your educational and informative presentations today. And thanks to all of you who have joined us. We hope to see you at our Q&A session on August 1st.